I'm just going to make a quick video here, hopefully quick, to announce the start of a new reading project, The Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan. Now, at the moment, I'm actually a couple reviews behind. I finished Herodotus last week and still have to review it. I finished Tarzan just now and still have to review it. So these reviews are still pending, but in the meantime, I need a book to carry around with me at work to eat, to read during my lunch break. So while I get these reviews ready, I'm just going to plow on ahead with the next reading project. So what I do in these started videos, if you're not familiar with them, they're kind of like an extended throat clearing. I talk about why I am starting a book, why I was attracted to the subject material in the first place. And I talk about my expectations for the book, but it's always worth keeping in mind that these are videos I make before I actually start the book. So at the moment I don't know what I'm talking about. These expectations may or may not pay off in the book at all. But the Peloponnesian War is perhaps the logical follow-up to Herodotus. Chronologically, Herodotus talks about the Persian Wars, and then the next thing chronologically in the Greek world is the Peloponnesian War. This was the big war between Athens and Sparta that just went on forever and ever and ever in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So my background on this. I was, as a youth, interested in ancient history, although I was never really a serious reader, so I dabbled more than really got into it. And by the time I got to high school, I decided I was more interested in Roman history. So I never really read up on Greek history. Didn't really read anything about the Peloponnesian Wars. Then when I got to college, I've mentioned this a couple times before on this channel, but when I got to college, you had to choose what you're going to major in. And I came in as a classics major. Somebody who was going to study ancient Rome and Greece. But within a year and a half, I changed my mind to a general history major because I'd fallen in love with the modern European history in the era of revolutions. You know, the French Revolution, the revolutions of 1848. It all seemed so exciting to me and so ideological and so relevant in a way that ancient history did not at the time, did still to this day. I've got huge gaps in my knowledge of ancient history. I've come to appreciate a little bit later in life, though, that perhaps I was wrong to leave behind ancient history because a lot of the ideological things I was interested in with the modern European revolutions, that's not entirely absent from ancient history. And the Peloponnesian Wars is a good example. I believe this took place at a period in Athens when Athens had the most radical form of populist democracy going on. And there was the battle between Athens and Sparta is I guess, mostly or in many ways a power struggle, but it was also in some levels an ideological struggle. They had different forms of government, and I've seen some allusions to the fact that part of the reason for this war was the Spartans were wary that the Athenians were trying to spread democracy. So there's ideology right there. But another thing, this war I've come to realize is often mentioned as like a parallel to the Cold War. And I think during the Cold War period, people in government were studying the Peloponnesian War because you had Athens and Sparta, and they were both two empires they had satellite cities, both of them at this point, cities which were under their domination. So they were kind of empires within their little area of the world. So two ideologically different empires who were in a tension between war and peace, because before the war broke out, there was a period of uneasy peace where neither side was entirely comfortable with each other, but neither side was entirely sure that they wanted to risk the mutual devastation that the war would bring. And then the war came out and was very costly for both sides. The other thing, speaking of ideology, is even though Athens was at its most radical democratic point in history at this point, sorry, they acted in a very imperialistic way in their foreign conquests. And Chomsky brings this up as a point, because people will often say to Chomsky, well, the U.S. can't be an imperialistic empire. It's the freest country in the world. And Chomsky will say, well, no, there's no connection between the internal governments of a country, the internal freedoms of a country, and their foreign policy. And Chomsky cites Athens as the example of this. So even though Athens had democracy at home, it was still doing horribly imperialistic things abroad. So now, let me reiterate what I said at the beginning. I haven't read the book yet, so some of what I have just said now could possibly be wrong. But that's my impression. And that's the reason why, for years, I've been meaning to get around to reading the Peloponnesian War. Now, this is Herodotus I've just finished. The Greek historian associated with the Peloponnesian Wars is Thucydides. I've heard various things about Thucydides. I've heard that he's very difficult to get through, that there's a lot of different factions and it's very difficult to keep track of. I've heard some people say that if you're going to read Thucydides, you really need the landmark Thucydides. So I've decided not to start with Thucydides. I'm reading a popular history meant for the common audience by Donald Kagan. Now, I first heard about this book on somebody's blog. There's a blogger I've been following. He doesn't post a lot, but he posts occasionally. It's called Blogging the Canon. I'll try and remember to link to it down below, in the description down below. But he does, as you would expect, read through the classics and blogs about them. And when he was reading Thucydides, he mentioned this book and said that Donald Kagan, The Peloponnesian War, was the perfect companion to Thucydides. Donald Kagan explained a lot of the background that Thucydides didn't, explained why Thucydides stopped writing about the war, what the other sources were. So I've had this kind of on my radar ever since I saw that blog post. Also, Donald Kagan, if you search for him on YouTube, he teaches at Yale, and his lectures on ancient Greece are part of Yale University's open courses, where they post the whole semester, the lectures from the whole semester on YouTube. And a few years ago, I listened to the whole thing, listened to it a few times through because I was using it as kind of background noise in my apartment. And yeah, I found it absolutely fascinating. Donald Kagan was a fascinating man to listen to. He is, I think, the preeminent expert on Thucydides and the Peloponnesian War, but the lectures were all about ancient Greece, and he was a very entertaining person to listen to on it. Lastly, the reason I'm doing this history instead of Thucydides is a piece of advice I got from Steve Donahue, not me personally, but Steve mentioned this on one of his videos. And this is going back a bit. you know Steve, he posts 4 videos a day, so who knows how many videos ago this was. I think it was a year or two ago he said this, but it stuck in my mind. He said, when you're reading up on a new subject, he said a mistake people make is going directly for the classic, like going directly for Thucydides or going directly for Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire or something like that. It seems that you don't get any points for doing that. You've got to work your way up to it. He said people don't want to acknowledge this, but there are levels in reading. So you have to you don't jump in at the top level. You work your way up to it. Now that's not what I did with Herodotus, but sorry, but probably that's what I should have done. I should have read some general Greek histories first before getting around to Herodotus. Although I've got to say Herodotus is fairly accessible. So it was still accessible, but I think I would have gotten more out of it if I would have had more of a context to put it in. The other thing with Herodotus is it's sometimes just digression after digression or anecdote after anecdote, which makes it, as I was reading it, sometimes I felt like I was having a hard time just remembering what I was reading or remembering what the important things were. I think if I had more of a background in the period generally, that would have helped. Okay, but so that's the rationale. That's why I want to go with the Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan first. I'm living out in Vietnam, so I don't have access to a good translation of Thucydides anyways at the moment. It's not being sold in Vietnamese bookstores. This book here I actually picked up when I was back in the U.S. 3 years ago. But you can only, if you've traveled abroad, you know this. You can only bring so many books with you. So I bought this at the time, and I'm just getting around to it now. Oh, speaking of other booktubers, Renovent Reads. I think I'm remembering that name correctly. He also was talking about this book. I don't know, about a year ago maybe, and he said he was going to read it alongside of Thucydides. In my case, I'm reading this for the moment instead of Thucydides, but may get around to it someday. May get around to Thucydides someday. And sorry, one more thing. I mentioned I was attracted to the ideology at the beginning of this video. Flipping through this book, and I've flipped through it, I've looked at the index, stuff like that. It doesn't look like Donald Kagan is overly heavy on the ideology. It looks like this is mostly a military history. But it should still be... I'm not big on military history, but it should still be... Of course, I say I'm not big on military history, but, it's called the Peloponnesian War. Obviously, it's going to be mostly about the war. And it'll be an education for me either way. In his lectures, Donald Kagan did talk a lot about the meaning of democracy and freedom and stuff like that. He is, if you listen to his lectures on Yale University, he is obviously politically conservative. And I am not. But that's no reason. I'm not into cancel culture or anything like that. He's obviously very knowledgeable about his subject, so I'm open to learning all I can from him with an open mind. And I found his Yale lectures on YouTube absolutely fascinating. Check those out if you haven't already. Donald Kagan's Yale courses on ancient Greece, Yale Open University, available on YouTube. I'll try and remember to link to everything I mentioned in the description down below. Okay, and that's me out for now.